May 31st, 2017. It's the Investitute podcast, and I have Chris Tsiolis from Investitute on the line here. What's up, Chris?
Andrew, what's happening?
Well, you're going out to Vegas, right?
I am.
For the World Series of Poker.
That's right. Yeah, I go every year. I try to catch a weekend tournament, and it's a lot of fun.
Now, you're a gambler. You're a poker player. This isn't, you're not going to be like fanboy. You're going to actually play and put dough up, right?
That's right. I used to play for a living, actually, or at least enough to get me from city to city, and it was fun for a couple of years. And then that's how actually I got into options trading. So it was kind of my start. My first gig in the industry. Actually, I met my former boss at a poker game. So
nice. Speaking of city to city, you live in Chicago. You see all them hobos that just showed up in the town? They're kind of on like every street.
There's a few right down by the Board of Trade, which I thought was interesting. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, they're hobos. They're like full on city to city hobos, and like now they're here in Chicago. And I looked at one today. I'm like, dude, get back on the train. Anyway, that's not you. You actually made money.
Yes, that's right. I did. I'm an Omaha high-low specialist. I play cash games predominantly, but every now and then I go out there for the big tournaments, so it's fun.
Okay, so you've been seeing some cool bits because you keep me informed on these oddities. I mean, we could sit here and talk about World Series of Poker all day, but what are these other bets you're seeing? Where are you seeing them?
Yeah, so I like to follow kind of the European betting markets, the online betting markets. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can bet on that is actually illegal in this country. I believe even in Vegas you can't bet on some of these things. And there's a lot of interesting bets, like, for instance, who will win the 2020 presidential election. I'm really following that one closely because there's a lot of interesting names on this list. And it's pretty...
we did a podcast on that. We did the podcast with Donald Trump like a year ago almost.
So remember?
Yeah, I remember.
It was
like
4-1 odds. So they were only pricing him at a 25% chance, and this was back in December, I believe, about a year out.
And I told you I didn't want to bet on him because I didn't want to jinx him.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I would have made what, double?
You would have made 3 times your money, 4 times your money.
Okay.
Depending on when you got in. So
all right, so let's pretend bet here. But these are real bets you can actually make. Where do you make them?
They're on an online sports book, so they're not quite legal in the U.S. But if you are in Europe, you can make these bets on Bovada. It's a site out of Costa Rica.
Okay, so what are the interesting ones you're saying?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the top of the list is Donald Trump, and he's at plus 200. So you get 200 back for every 100 you put up. Mike Pence is a second with 750 for every 100 you put up. Elizabeth Warren is third at 850. But the really interesting one, there's a couple interesting ones down the list, which I think are way undervalued, in my opinion. For instance, Mark Cuban, I think, he's been very vocal, right, in politics lately. Sure. And, I think that he's got a much better shot than they're pricing in here. They're saying 50-1 odds for Mark Cuban, which I think is way too low. It's a great price. I think he might have a chance.
Well, whether he does or he doesn't, if you bet on this, because I've often said that he should run, but if you're going to have one person run against Donald Trump, you either have to have a big mouth or as much money as him. And there's only one person I could think of, and that's Mark Cuban. So if you put down X dollars, and let's just say he announces, I'm going to run, that you could actually make money. Whether he wins or not, it's another story.
Well, he's got to win. No, he's got to win. It's a
binary.
It's binary, and you're locked in. You can't close it out. So basically, you want to put up $1 today and lock in your dollar for the next 4 years, you will get 50 times return if you're correct in 4 years.
You'll get $50.
You get $50. There's other interesting names on this list. We got Chelsea Clinton at 150-1. We got Tom Brady at 150-1. George Clooney at 150-1. And another interesting one here is Tammy Duckworth from Chicago here. She's at 100-1, which I thought that was interesting that she even made. Yeah.
I'd go with the Cuban one.
I think Cuban's a really good bet. I think it's a really good bet.
I don't know about good, but if you're going to throw $1 at something, Okay, so speaking of throwing dollars at something, I'm hearing and I've heard that some of these poker tournaments, these guys that get these chips, they take their poker chips and they go and spend them on, let's say, houses of ill repute for actually services, and the girls or the guys that take these chips aren't really getting chips; they're getting tournament chips. Is that? Do they still do that, or have you heard?
Well, I have no idea, but it doesn't surprise me. In tournaments, you don't play with actual cash casino chips, but you play with tournament chips that have the same denomination on them. But it says on there in small letters, no cash value. So if you're not reading too closely, you might get confused. So I can see how they can try to pull that one off.
Yeah. So if you're out in Vegas and somebody offers you a tournament chip for whatever, just be careful.
Yeah, just say no, kids. Just say no.
All right. Well, I got John coming on here in a sec. So
wonderful. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Good luck in your tournament.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Okay, John. So we just had Chris on. Would you take that Mark Cuban prop bet 50-1 for president?
Yeah, I'd take it. I sure wouldn't be selling that one. In other words, I wouldn't want to be the bookie on that. 50-1, even though it's that far out in the future, I wouldn't want to take that bet. Mark's a smart guy, got plenty of money. I know, according to an inside source, that he is exploring the idea. Now, exploring and actually going with it are two different things, but for 50-1, sure, I'd put 50-1. I'd put money down on 50-1 payoff on that.
Yeah, I figured $1.
I think I'd put more than $1 on it.
All
but
right, $2.
I do know where you're going with that, and yes, I would wait. But I think we're pretty close.
All right. Speaking of waiting, getting close. Goldman
Yes.
Sachs. We did a nice podcast yesterday about the debt. We didn't go too much into the debt, etc., but we talked as a 30,000-foot view. Goldman Sachs is down again today. I'm looking at it. I mean, it's on my radar big time. It's down $8 right now.
It should be. Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it's down to 210. This is a pretty critical area of support where we should see support. Doesn't mean we will. As you guys who are regular listeners know, areas where you think you should see support aren't necessarily areas where you do find support. But I kind of like the idea of getting in there and doing a trade, Andrew. In fact, I did sell some puts at the 205 strike today. Why did I do that? Well, like Andrew and I discussed yesterday, we won't belabor it. Listen to that podcast. But this is a relatively minor amount of money for Goldman Sachs. They paid 31 cents on the dollar, so we were really close, Andrew, when we said yesterday.
Oh, so you did find out how much? 31 cents.
31 cents on the dollar.
You're damn close.
So, rough terms, folks, that means that, when the bonds were issued in 2014 at par, they were going to have a certain yield, and now people are saying, well, there's only a 31% chance that these bonds are going to be any good. That's not the direct correlation, but that's the way I like to look at risk. And so I'll take that shot. I'd take it with Argentina, and I'd take it with Venezuela, and I'd take it with, a host, Brazil, a whole host of emerging market economies that have sketchy governments and so forth in place. But yeah, this is, I think, risk-reward on Goldman, down here at 210, or where I sold it, 205, move the odds pretty strongly into my favor, Andrew. So yeah, that's why I did it. I sold the 205 puts.
Okay, I was looking at the 210 Januaries. Give myself some time, right into money.
Okay.
Like 16 and some change. They were like almost 17, so now they're coming
These are puts or calls?
Calls, just a straight bet.
Okay, so you're buying upside calls.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, we were seeing 250 calls being bought aggressively prior to this, just a week or 2 weeks, 10 days ago. So I'm much more of a guy that wants to fade something like this and say, okay, you guys had your fun. Knocked the stock down from 220 something last week to 210 now. Don't mind if I do a little feasting here.
Okay.
And that's what I intend to do.
Maybe I'll put him in for 16. All right. So what else is going on? Anything new today?
Well, let's see. We had Kevin O'Leary on, so that was cool. Like I say, with Mark Cuban and your first question, Kevin was on. We're going to grab some dinner here. Maybe not this week. I think next week. But always good to hear his perspective. He does a lot of currency unhedged trades, and right now he's doing a lot of that in Europe, not hedging the currency out, which means, of course, that instead of going from dollars to euros, if you do it unhedged, of course, you have exposure to the currency. It also means, of course, because that cuts both ways, that you can have positive exposure to the currency. It just depends on which way you think it's going to go. So I'm with Kevin. I think you always have to weigh what the liquidity factors are, as well as, how much risk versus the reward that you expect. And we had Mark Faber on, Mr.
God.
Doom, Gloom, and Boom on the halftime. He was very nice.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He's a bit different, but he was, saying, well, I see the possibility, John, that maybe we go into a global blah, blah, blah. And, okay, fine. What are you putting your money in right now? 90% in emerging markets. And again, he was very kind to come on the show, so this is not me making fun of Mr. Faber. I'm talking like his Faber. I'm talking as with the accent that he affects.
Huh.
But I would say that, you get into emerging markets. Well, Brazil fell 10% in one day last week. Not an individual stock, the Brazil stock market. So,
on top of the 50 it did last year?
So you can look around, folks, and see stocks that fall 10%. I got one for you today, Coors, K-O-R-S. But that is a stock, not an entire country. For an entire country to fall 10% is a big deal. This happens in emerging markets. It will continue to happen in emerging markets, but that's why you need to weigh the risk versus the reward. The risk is both liquidity and that you could see this thing flip upside down. That is a problem when it does. Doesn't mean you can't make a nice rate of return if you're very nimble and you are disciplined and take your profits. So that's all I'm going to say about it. I think we had a nice discussion, and I'm just on the other side of Mr. Farber on this one.
Well, that's cool. Your dinner must be interesting, two celebrities like yourself.
Two celebrities.
Going out to dinner and stuff, they'd be like, oh, my God, what are they talking about? I mean, you could imagine, like, somebody. Never mind. Anyway.
Now you're flattering us, but
well, you know what I'm saying.
Kevin's a tad
well, you're
more
both on TV all the time, and you both talk
That's
about
true.
money, and he's gregarious. And, I mean, he's got.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
He is, and he's a good guy. I enjoy him a lot.
A lot of people watch Shark Tank. I mean, that gets some ratings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great show, and again, good luck to my friend Mark Cuban. I loved it when he tweeted yesterday, Andrew. Welcome to the SEC Ass Kickers Club.
I know,
Mr. Cooperman.
I feel
because
bad.
Mark,
I feel
of
bad
course,
for Mr. Cooperman.
Me too.
Yeah,
but I mean, I liked that
deal with this crap.
Both Cooperman and Cuban stood up to the SEC because sometimes I think that agency can overextend itself into areas that they really don't belong. And I think in this case, both those two cases, I don't think Mark Cuban did insider trading, and I don't think Lee did. And here were two guys with enough money to fight him on it, and turned out neither one was found guilty.
Every time I saw when I was listening to talk yesterday, the only thing I could think about was that show Billions and Paul Giamatti going after it's a different storyline, obviously.
Yeah, going after.
But I could just see it's like one of those
Damian
guys.
Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know just what you mean.
And they're like, poor old Lee Cooperman's like, I didn't do anything wrong. I got to spend all this money anyway. All right, so we'll leave it. We'll leave it on that, man.
All right. Well, as always, folks, please tell a friend about the podcast if they want to learn more about bond trading and what bonds, what it means when Goldman or anybody else buys bond. It's what we talked about yesterday on the podcast. You can subscribe through iTunes or YouTube, and please share it with a friend and leave a comment, because we'll be happy to answer some of your questions and or just read your comments on air and put them out there in front of 250,000 people.